Okay, guys, we're going to talk about the sander, the wide belt sander. It's really a luxury to have. We didn't have one of these when I was a kid, and I spent a lot of time with a belt sander and then a half sheet sander, and a cabinet scraper, getting everything flattened out. But we can do so much better stuff now because we can just run our pieces through the sander and then just do a little disc sanding and they're done. It's really a game changer. Um, as far as safety goes, there's some moving parts, there's some pinch points, there's the potential of a kickback, but you're way more likely to screw the machine up than get injured on it. And so that's kind of my focus as we talk about this thing. We'll go through the rules. Number one, we got a minimum stock length of 12 inches, which is actually pretty short for this. 12 inches, we'll go through there, but it might kind of have some snipe as it comes out. 14 inches would be better. If you do have short pieces, I always try for any machine, if I can leave those 12-inch pieces hooked together, so instead of making two 12-inch pieces, I'll make like one 25-inch piece and then cut it to 12 later. Um, that's always going to be our preference if we can avoid cutting short pieces short until the very end, until right before we're ready to router them or whatever. Number two, we're going to carefully measure the thickness of the material and set the machine to that thickness. So in theory, if things are set up right, if I end there at 8.5, I should be able to start here at 8.5. What I like you to do is lay all your boards out before you run through here and make sure they're all the same thickness so that you didn't accidentally grab one that didn't get surfaced. Because if you run that surfaced one or the unsurfaced one with all the surfaced ones, you're taking off way more than you should, and we can really screw the machine up. So we're not going to try and automatically take anything off right away. We're just, if we ended at 8.5, we're going to start at 8.5 and then we'll go from there. Number three, change the depth a maximum of 0.01 or 1/100th for heavy grits and 0.005 for fine grits. And so if we have 100 grit on there, heavy duty sandpaper, we can take a little bit more off. If we have 180 on, we got to be a little, it's not going to remove as much material, so we can't take as much off per pass. Four, don't continually run stock in the same spot over and over and over. It's going to wear the sandpaper out in that spot. And then when I go to take a big board and run a big board through, it's going to get sanded really good here and not so good in that spot that we ran everything a billion times through. Don't attempt to run stock of varying thicknesses through. The thinner piece will get kicked out. Short pieces should be run end to end. I'll talk about how to start the machine here in a minute. In an emergency, hit the emergency stop. So there's 4 emergency stops. Okay, so if maybe your shirt gets caught in there and it's an emergency, hit the stop. The biggest emergency we have is somebody accidentally took too much off, and so you'll hear this machine kind of bog down. Maybe worst case scenario, it starts squealing like you're taking way too much off. If this needle jumps over, it jumps way over, or you're pushing it too hard. Stop it as fast as you can before anything, before any more damage is done. Just as fast as you can, boom, hit the stop. All right, and then we'll reset it. We'll look at your piece and make sure that we weren't trying to take too much off. Maybe we mismeasured or something, but the least amount of damage that we can do to that, the better. And then ask me for help if it won't start. Normally, if it won't start, somebody. So if I'm trying to turn this thing on, maybe somebody pushed one of these and you didn't realize it. We don't use these to shut the machine down. These are just for an emergency. Okay, so you might have to twist that and let it pop out, and then, oh, now it can turn on. The other thing is, if we don't have our air compressor on, or if we forgot to flip this little air pressure switch here, then it won't turn on. And so that's something else to check. But if our air's on, these aren't pushed in, then we're just going to turn our master control on, turn our master start on. Then we can set our height. Okay, so we can use this lever to open or close that. Make sure if you're opening it, if you're dropping it down, make sure our table didn't get pushed underneath it over here, because that'll jack the whole thing up. Okay, so make sure there's nothing underneath the table if we're dropping it a lot. Okay, and then we'll set our height. We got to reset our brake, and then we can turn it on. and then we can start our feed. And then to shut it off, we're just going to push the 2 off buttons to shut it off. And we can just let it die down. We can turn this. That will shut it off faster. It sets a brake in there. And when we got this new machine, the manual said let it die down as much as you can. Try and avoid just like, powering it off, setting that brake in. It's got a feed speed adjustment here, and we want to just leave that alone. Right now it's set at 2. Let's just leave it at 2. What can happen is if we have it if it's going too fast, it's not removing as much material as it should, and it might work for a pass or two, but by the 3rd pass, now it's trying to remove material that should have been removed on the previous pass, and it's working way too hard, and it's just more likely to overload it basically and make it bog down and make that noise that I talked about. So before you start, you want to check, see what kind of sandpaper we have on. Most of the time we're going to be running 100 grit, and then for our last pass on stuff, we'll drop this lever down, the Platen. We'll drop the Platen down, maybe put a fine grit on there, and then that'll make like a nice smooth pass for the end. We don't run that all the time. When we drop the Platen, it actually makes it take more off. And so if you just finished at 8.0, when you drop the Platen, you need to run that thing back to 8.3 and start at 8.3 and work your way down, because it's making it take more off. So we have to account for that in our height. I guess that's it. So I'm going to take this board that I surfaced. I'm going to scribble on it. That way I know if I'm hitting. Now, I think we didn't have that digital thing set up. Let me measure this thing. Well, I think I'm about at 8.2. I'm going to set it at 8.2. 8.2 is kind of I'm definitely not going to be taking anything off at 8.2, or at least I hope not. So it's kind of a cautious number. I don't mind running one board through until I find out that it's hitting versus accidentally taking too much off, if that makes sense. So I'm already pretty close. I don't want to screw around with this thing and get it crazy close. Like, if I'm pretty close, I can do it by hand. I'm going to rotate this to 8.2. I'm going to send it through. If I didn't hit anything, then I'll raise it up. If I do hit this, then I'd run all the rest of my pieces through. Okay, so I took a nice pass. It didn't actually hit my line, but I heard it hit, so I know it's touching it. So I'd probably move it up 1 and then run them all through. So basically, we're going to just sand until we get all those lines off or all our surfacer marks off. If you're doing a panel, like a raised panel or a door or something, we're going to sand that more later on. So you don't have to get this thing 100% perfect. We're just trying to get a nice, consistent thickness. And then once it's glued together, then we'll run it through for real. So it's not unusual to just run it a couple times on each side, or maybe one time on each side once it's hitting, and then we'll do our other stuff with it, and then we'll come back and sand it after it's glued. I know there's a lot of information. I just want you to know I really care a lot about this machine, and I don't want to think about my life without it. It just allows us to do so much great stuff because of the time that it saves. So I really want to take care of it. So if in doubt, ask me a question about this. Don't try and think you have it all figured out and then screw this up. I'll be very upset. Okay, it'll really upset me. Okay, thanks.